Good evening, everyone. Coming to you again with a book review, and today I wanted to briefly address the German novel called The Reader, which is by Bernhard Schlink, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. And basically, The Reader follows this particular male character, Michael Berg, and his encounter with a older woman named Hannah Schmidt. Now, in case some of you might be wondering if The Reader does sound like a familiar work, well, it has been adapted to a movie, and that movie stars Kate Winslet and Ralph Fiennes, I believe. Ralph Fiennes plays the older version of the male protagonist or male main character, Michael, and Kate Winslet plays Hannah, and for the most Hannah Schmidt. And for the most part, this book sort of follows their kind of relationship, how it starts, how it evolves, how it becomes separate, and how they sort of come together again, and then it sort of leads into sort of the ending of the book. And for the most part, this novel takes place in Germany after the events of World War II, and you sort of see how throughout the story Michael is part of the younger generation that hasn't really been so much exposed to World War II and its impacts on the world because of his fairly young age. So for the most part, this book is sort of telling you sort of the aftermath of the war, but through sort of a German perspective. And Hannah is a character who has been through the war, and you'll kind of see how at one point in the novel she is put on trial for certain crimes that she committed, and you'll sort of see what those crimes are if you choose to read the novel. And for the most part, the book is sort of structured as a 3-act kind of deal, where you have part 1 where it's Hannah and Michael sort of developing their romantic relationship, and it is sort of provocative and might be provocative for some people because Hannah is fairly older than Michael. Michael, I believe, is in sort of like high school when he meets her, and she's like in her 30s. So yes, might not be the best cup of tea for people who may find older women dating fairly younger men controversial. But basically that's really what part 1 is based upon. And then the part 2 goes into later on, because you'll see how Michael and Hannah sort of separate from each other, and then she shows up again, but in a trial, because she's being again accused of particular crimes that occurred during World War II and that she was a part of. And you'll sort of see how the trial sort of unfolds, and how Michael ends up being sort of part of that trial. And then you'll sort of see the impacts after the trial in the part 3 of the book. And for the most part, that's really what this book's about in a nutshell. For the most part, it's really nothing more elaborate or twisting or turning in any direction. No, it's a fairly straightforward plot for the most part. It's kind of what you see is what you get. But I think what the book tries to do is it tries to paint these characters and paint them in a way that is through Michael's perspective, because this book is through the main protagonist character, Michael's perspective, the young boys, and you'll see how he gets older and he becomes a man and such. But for the most part, he kind of paints this sort of world that he's grown up in and that he's lived in, and you really get a sense of what his character's going through, his character's mindset, his motivations, and this kind of leaves Hannah's character a little bit obscure at times, but at the same time I think that it was a good choice that the author decided to tell it through Michael's perspective, because I think he has enough range to really get around what's really going on. And I think even though there are certain things within the novel that kind of remain unanswered towards the end regarding more of Hannah's character, I think for the most part Michael was a good choice to have as somebody who to give the book a voice, and even though you don't get as much of Hannah as you would probably get if it was told not through his perspective, I think it still leaves the doors open for people to sort of have their own interpretation of who Hannah really is as a character. And basically, him being kind of a young boy at the age that he is, I think he's drawn to Hannah's character in particular because of the fact that she has this sort of, mysterious life, and the fact that there's a lot of unique qualities that she has, unlike people that are within Michael's age group. And you'll kind of see how he has his life outside with Hannah, and then he has the life that he has secretly and privately with Hannah, and that relationship is never really fully exposed because it's kind of like bridging between two different worlds, his boyhood-like world and then his world with Hannah. And it's fairly interesting for the most part to kind of see how he sort of has these two separate sort of lives, and it's very interesting to see how their relationship evolves, and for the most part the way that the author uses his words, even though this is translated to English. Again, this is actually a German novel, so it was actually written in German. So I think even the translation into English is fairly good for what it is. But I think I would find it a little bit more fascinating to actually read it in German and see how it sounds, because at some points there are things within English that probably people wouldn't really say. Hannah has a tendency to call Michael kid sometimes, and I think we would find this kind of word choice in English rather odd, because usually it's not something that an older woman would say to a younger boy. But I think within the German context it might be considered normal. I'm not sure, but for the most part it seems to translate well, and I think you can understand it, even though there might be some again, that kind of wording that might be considered different in the English language. But for the most part this book is fairly easy to read because it's just over 200 pages. I just got done reading it within 3 days. So it's a fairly light read. It kind of approaches on themes of sort of on a philosophical level. And you'll kind of realize why the book is called The Reader once you kind of get into the characters and stuff. I don't really want to give so much away from the book, but it does provide you a context as to why certain things are the way they are. And it still leaves you, though, with things that are kind of left unanswered. And again, it is kind of addressing a controversial time period after World War II, when Germany still had this struggle of identity, and the difference between the two generations. Again, sort of Michael's generation and then Hannah's generation, the generation of Nazism and then the generation of basically the future. And you sort of see how these kinds of differences are sort of come together, especially with sort of the trial, because again, you have this trial that's supposed to sort of punish the past, but yet the past is sort of being brought to light, and at the same time it presents sort of the guilt factor that the younger generation has for what their previous generation has done to them and to their sort of identity as individuals. And you'll kind of see how this theme is sort of important throughout the book. And I think it sort of explains why the author chose this kind of generational difference between Hannah and Michael. And you'll sort of see how Michael has a really hard time dealing with Hannah, because she's a character that's pretty much taken over really his mind, it seems like, because a lot of the time he can't really not get his mind off of her completely. And you'll sort of see how even as a fairly older man, he still isn't capable of sort of leaving that past part of his life behind. And you'll kind of see how he's sort of drawn to the past and what the past means to him for the most part throughout the book. But I really think that's all I can address regarding this book. I mean, it's fairly direct as to what it's trying to say for the most part. It is rather sad at points. It is a little heartbreaking at times, and you do feel for the characters. I think the author provides an interesting and identifiable lead protagonist, Michael, as he kind of tells you the story the story and events of his life, and how Hannah really affects those events. And for the most part, I find it interesting that this is by a German author and it's told through a German perspective. I think we rarely get these kinds of books, and for them to be even so popular as to make a movie out of them, I find that rather fascinating. So I think it's definitely worth a read if you're interested into themes that deal with maybe this kind of generational difference. If you like the romance, that's totally understandable, totally a good reason to to indulge in this book. Can it be a little bit erotic at times? Not necessarily. Don't think this book is like a 50 Shades of Grey. No, it's not. It's not. I think they play it out fairly fairly I want to say realistic, in the sense that it's not over the top. It feels genuine. It feels like that these characters are actual characters, and it doesn't really try to force the eroticism in your face at all. The only thing that's really necessarily erotic about the book is just the fact that she has, again, she has a huge age gap difference. She's like 30 and he's like in his late teens. So yeah, that's really the only controversial-esque part of this entire book for the most part. And also the and also the aspect of dealing with Nazis and the SS and the concentration camps, which you will see as part of the whole crime slash trial section of the book. But for the most part, I think you do kind of see that even though you'll find that Hannah has this guilt onto her character, in the end you kind of see how she sort of rises up from that guilt for what she's done in the past, and you'll kind of see how that unfolds towards the end, but without giving anything away, because for the most part this book is fairly short, so it is a fairly quick read, and I don't want to try to give too much away for the most part, but I think this is really all you need to know going into it for the most part, because it's really just it's just over 200 pages, and it's really like that. It's just structured as like this 3-act, like Act 1, Hannah and Michael meet, relationship. Act 2, separation, trial. Act 3, aftermath of trial, is basically how this book plays out for the most part. And I think even though it is a rather more gloomy book, this is not a rainbows and sunshine book, this is a fairly gloomy book, I think it has a lot of realism to it and a lot of depth, and at the same time heart to it. And I think the author did a good job of trying to show this kind of realistic side and do it through a German perspective, which I find to be very fascinating. But I think that's really all I can say about this book. Any questions, comments, concerns? More than happy to answer them, but I think that's really all I can say about this book. It's really a fascinating read, and I definitely would recommend it, and I definitely would recommend the film as well, even though I have not seen the film. But if Kate Winslet, I believe she won Best Actress that year for this movie, so I figure, yeah, might as well see the movie too if you'd like. But I think the book is a very good start into looking into more German literature that is translatable to English readers. But I think that's all I can really say. Any questions, comments, concerns or concerns, again, more than happy to answer them. But until next time, everybody,